He stood in line like anyone else, polished shoes, tailored suit, and a calm presence that drew glances, not just for how he looked, but because of who people assumed he wasn't. In a place where appearance whispered privilege and access, his skin color screamed exception. The moment he stepped forward, the teller's voice rose, not in greeting, but in warning. This line is for premier clients only. What happened next wasn't just humiliating. It was recorded, dissected, and ignited a financial storm that no one saw coming. But the man said nothing. No protest, no outburst, just a card placed gently on the counter. What followed would rip through boardrooms, bring down billion-dollar institutions, and force the entire world to ask, who did they just throw out? If you're ready for a story of power, prejudice, and the most calculated reckoning ever caught on camera, like and subscribe now. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from? And what would you have done if it were you in that line? This is just the beginning. Malcolm Ray entered Argent Trust Bank as he had many others before, purposeful, poised, and fully confident in the power of precision. He moved with quiet authority across the polished marble floor, his oxblood leather shoes echoing faintly under the cathedral ceilings. The bank's interior exuded exclusivity, gold-trimmed counters, velvet-lined ropes, and artfully placed sculptures bathed in soft lighting. Everything here was built to intimidate, to reassure the already powerful that they were right where they belonged. Malcolm belonged here. His dark charcoal suit was custom-fitted to his 6-foot frame. His silk tie knotted precisely, and in his hand was a sleek black folio containing documents for a confidential asset transfer. It was business, simple and routine. He had done this before. This particular branch of Argent Trust was a high-value client location, reserved for individuals with wealth, leverage, and legacy. Malcolm had all three. As he stepped confidently into the premier and corporate clients line, he barely glanced at the others waiting in general service. Then the voice came, slicing through the ambient hush like a sudden alarm. "Sir, this line is for premier clients only." Heads turned, conversation stilled. From behind a pane of reinforced glass, teller Deborah Lunsford stared at him with a pinched expression and a raised brow. Her voice rang out again, sharp and disapproving, as if she were addressing a student who had wandered into the teacher's lounge. Malcolm looked directly at her, unflinching. "Yes," he said evenly, "this is the correct line." He was calm as always, but her eyes didn't soften. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, still not reaching for the touchscreen in front of her. "Yes," Malcolm replied, holding out his premier titanium card. "With Mr. Lanham, 10 o'clock. Her gaze dropped the card, but she didn't take it. She just stared at it, then back at him. "That's a premier card," she said, incredulous, voice still raised enough for half the lobby to hear. She leaned forward with a sneer. "Where'd you get that?" "eBay." A smattering of chuckles floated through the marble air. Malcolm's shoulders stiffened. "It's genuine. Check the system." "Sure it is," Deborah muttered. She finally reached for the card and turned it over slowly, her lips twisting. She smacked it down onto the counter with a dismissive flick. "Impressive forgery. But we've seen worse." The laughter grew louder this time. A man in a navy suit 2 lines over whispered something to his companion, both of them chuckling behind raised hands. "I'd like to speak to Mr. Lanham," Malcolm said again, louder, firmer. "Immediately." But Deborah was already waving to the security station. "We've got a disruption at the premier counter," she called, as if he weren't standing right there. "Need assistance." 2 guards moved fast. One was tall and lean with a buzz cut, the other older and rounder, with a face like a closed door. Malcolm turned to face them as they approached. "Gentlemen," he said evenly, "there's no problem here. I have an appointment. My credentials are legitimate. You can verify them." "Step away from the line, sir," the older one said. "We need to ask you to exit the building." "On what grounds?" Malcolm demanded. "That teller is refusing to acknowledge my status as a client. She's making assumptions." "Now," the younger one said, stepping in close. A hand gripped Malcolm's elbow. It wasn't rough, but it didn't ask permission either. The manager, a man in a pinstripe suit who had been watching from his glass office, turned his back and pulled the blinds. Malcolm's folio dropped to the floor. The sound of it echoed. No one moved to help. "Don't touch me," he said. His voice didn't rise, but it was steel. "I'm a registered account holder with this bank. I've done nothing wrong." "We've asked you to leave," the older guard said again. Behind him, someone muttered, "He probably stole that suit." Deborah grinned, arms folded behind the glass. Malcolm was being escorted toward the doors. The briefcase was picked up by the older guard, treated like lost property. No one returned his card. No one asked for his name. Outside, the sunlight was glaring. Malcolm stood frozen on the steps, heart racing beneath his jacket. His breath came in shallow waves, but he kept his posture rigid. It was here that Deborah Lunsford held court. She was still flushed with triumph, the same look on her face that she'd worn after humiliating Malcolm Ray downstairs only 30 minutes prior. "You should have seen his face," she crowed, sipping coffee from a chipped World's Best Ant mug. Walked in like he owned the place. Mr. Armani attitude with his fancy fake card. The audacity. Her voice shifted into a caricature of Malcolm's smooth, composed tone. "Excuse me, I have an appointment." She drew the words out, exaggerating the pitch and pacing. "This is my card. Please check your records." Her impression was followed by dramatic eye rolls and fake gasps of indignation. Laughter exploded around the table. 3 tellers and an assistant branch manager named Lynn were doubled over, one even clapping. Another piped up, "Seriously, what is it with these guys thinking just because they dress nice we won't notice the hustle?" "I'm telling you," Deborah said, raising a finger like a preacher, "they learn how to walk the walk. But when you peel back the layers, nothing underneath but attitude and entitlement." More laughter. From the hallway, Elias Monroe leaned against the doorframe unnoticed. A junior data analyst fresh out of college, Elias had only been with Argent Trust for 6 months. He was quiet, observant, the kind of employee who noticed everything and said nothing. Until now. His phone, tucked low in his hand, recorded the entire exchange. The image was shaky, but the audio was crystal clear. Elias didn't know Malcolm Ray, but he had watched the video that went viral an hour after the incident, taken by a client in the bank lobby. It had already racked up 50,000 views. Elias hadn't commented on it, hadn't liked or shared it. But the moment he saw it, something curdled in his gut. And hearing Deborah and the others laugh about it, twist it into a comedy sketch, was worse than the video itself. When Deborah mimicked Malcolm's voice a second time, this time adding a masa for effect, Elias clicked his phone screen off and slipped it into his pocket. He turned silently and walked back to his cubicle. His heart was pounding. The hallway felt like it stretched for miles. Every fluorescent bulb hummed louder than usual. The moment he reached his desk, he plugged in his earbuds and reviewed the clip. It was clear, damning. Her words, the laughter, the specific references to race and professionalism. It wasn't just offensive. It was toxic. It was systemic. He opened a new window, logged into the internal complaint portal, and uploaded the video with a detailed summary. He cited the incident, the room, the participants, the time. He checked the box to remain anonymous and hit submit. Then he sat back in his chair and stared at the screen. 5 minutes passed, 10, then 20. A new email arrived in his inbox. The subject line read, "Compliance Notice HR." The message was brief. It thanked him for his submission and assured him that the matter would be reviewed. There was no mention of the video, no acknowledgement of the details he had provided. Elias frowned. He returned to the portal and searched the status of his complaint. It was marked closed, internal action taken. Nothing more. That was fast. Too fast. Suspiciously fast. Less than an hour later, Elias's computer rebooted unexpectedly. When he tried to log back in, his password failed 3 times. Then the screen went dark and a white message appeared. Access restricted, contact IT. He called the internal help desk. A woman answered and asked him to hold. Minutes passed. She returned, her voice cooler this time. "We've flagged some activity on your network account," she said. "IT is reviewing your permissions. In the meantime, your access will remain restricted." Flagged. Elias repeated. "For what?" "That's not information I'm authorized to share," she replied. "Please follow up with your department head." The call ended. Elias sat frozen. His phone buzzed. A calendar notification appeared. Meeting, HR check-in 4:30 p.m. Location, Executive Conference Room 2. No subject, no reason, no explanation. He looked around. No one in the open office space had noticed. Or, if they had, no one said a word. The silence of complicity wrapped the room like fog. By 4:30, Elias sat stiffly in the gray conference room. Across the table sat a woman named Miss Teller, not a joke, that was really her name, who spoke in carefully neutral HR essay about behavior, propriety, and respecting professional boundaries. She said there had been concerns about his privacy practices and the unauthorized use of recording devices. Elias didn't argue. He just sat there, listening as she explained that while they appreciated his passion for improvement, it would be best if he took a leave of absence while an internal review was conducted. It wasn't a suspension. It wasn't even formal. But it was enough. They didn't need to fire him. They could isolate him, bury him, make him vanish in silence. When he walked back to his desk, his login still didn't work. The institution that had seemed so sleek, so impenetrable, had just shown its teeth, and Elias wasn't going to let that silence him. Still holding his phone, he opened his encrypted backup app and uploaded the recorded clip of Deborah's break room reenactment. He added the lobby video of Malcolm's removal, which had already been sent to him via a private message from a friend in the lobby's IT department. Someone who had seen the footage pulled before it could be deleted. The clips went live an hour later under an anonymous social media account named @Glass Ceiling Breach. The first video, showing Malcolm Ray's composed demeanor, his polite insistence, and the swift, humiliating way he was removed by security, was titled #TheBankPush. The second video, which was more disturbing in tone, showed Deborah and her co-workers in the break room, laughing and mimicking Malcolm with racist undertones. The audio was unforgiving. Her voice, the cruel impression, the laughter, the comments about guys like him. It was all there. Within minutes, the posts were shared and reshared. At first, just a few dozen reactions, then a few hundred, then a few thousand, then 10,000. The outrage was instant, organic, and volcanic. The algorithms caught on like wildfire. By morning, #TheBankPush was trending in 5 major U.S. cities. By lunchtime, #RayWasRight had joined it. Celebrities reposted it with words like disgusting, dehumanizing, and shameful. Activists demanded answers. Influencers dissected every word, every facial expression in the footage. Thread after thread analyzed Malcolm's body language, the absurdity of Deborah's accusations, and the smugness in her reenactment. People wanted to know, who was this man? And why wasn't anyone at Argent Trust saying a word? The silence only poured gasoline on the fire. Malcolm Ray, meanwhile, remained entirely offline. He didn't issue a statement, didn't respond to messages, didn't grant interviews. He was like the eye of the storm, quiet, still, powerful. It only made the public hungrier. By midday, national news outlets picked up the story. Headlines read, "Prominent banker humiliated, ejected from elite branch, caught on camera. Racial profiling or mistaken identity, and Argent Trust faces backlash after viral incident." Inside the bank, the atmosphere was thick with dread. Employees walked on eggshells. Deborah Lunsford was asked to stay in her office. When she did emerge, she carried herself with false bravado, trying to pretend she didn't hear the whispers or feel the eyes. Management held emergency meetings in hushed tones. Legal was looped in. PR scrambled. But their first move was the wrong one. At 3:16 p.m., Argent Trust's official Twitter account posted a statement. It read, "We are aware of a recent video circulating regarding an incident at one of our branches. After internal review, we have determined that no protocol was violated. We commend our staff for their alertness and professionalism. Client safety remains our top priority." The backlash was immediate and brutal. Commenters flooded the post with screenshots of Malcolm's card being slapped away, Deborah's smirk as security dragged him out, and worst of all, the break room video. The bank's attempt to whitewash the incident was tone-deaf at best and blatantly dismissive at worst. Top replies demanded the termination of Deborah and her colleagues. Others threatened to close accounts. A prominent civil rights attorney posted, "If this is what Argent Trust calls protocol, I hope every client reevaluates where their money sleeps." The tweet was liked by over 500,000 users. Under mounting pressure, PR issued a second statement 12 hours later, this one more carefully worded, but still hollow. It acknowledged the public concern, promised a review of inclusivity policies, and added that appropriate measures would be taken. But it was too late. The original post had been screenshot and shared across every major platform. Memes had started to appear, Deborah's smirking face overlaid with captions like "Premier Alertness" and "Forgery Finder." An artist even turned Malcolm's still image, suit neat, face composed as security flanked him, into a stylized portrait that began circulating as a symbol of modern discrimination. Protesters appeared at Argent's headquarters in Chicago the next morning, holding signs with phrases like "Where's the forgery?" and "Banking while black." They were peaceful, organized, and relentless. As the public fury escalated, the pressure inside the bank's executive offices reached boiling point. The board scheduled a late-night crisis meeting. Some directors pushed to suspend Deborah immediately. Others wanted to let the fire die down. CEO Patrick Norwell tried to maintain a neutral stance, but even he looked visibly worn by the ordeal. He had received over 30 voicemails from partners and investors asking what was going on and how quickly it could be contained. Meanwhile, the HR department sent out a passive memo to staff reminding them of the bank's zero-tolerance policy for harassment, without naming names or taking responsibility. Behind the scenes, Deborah was advised to make her social media accounts private. She followed the instruction but balked when told to apologize publicly. For what? She hissed at the internal comms lead. "For doing my job? That guy faked a card. I was protecting the bank. This is just woke nonsense." No one responded. They didn't have to. The tension had turned to fear. New employees whispered in stairwells. Long-term staff exchanged glances. And in the eye of it all, Malcolm remained silent. His silence wasn't weakness, it was power. A quiet that spoke louder than the bank's polished statements or Deborah's thin defenses. Even clients of Argent began to murmur. Some transferred their funds. Others scheduled quiet meetings with their advisors, asking if the bank had a contingency plan. This wasn't just a viral video. It had become a credibility crisis. Protesters outside Argent's headquarters held firm. Journalists circled the institution like sharks, and online investigators, driven by outrage and armed with time, began digging. What they found shattered any illusion that the incident with Malcolm was isolated. Within 48 hours of Argent's tone-deaf public statement, anonymous messages began surfacing on encrypted forums, detailing past grievances involving Deborah Lunsford. The leaks weren't just vague accusations, they were specific, dated, and damning. One document, stamped with an internal complaint header, detailed how Deborah had once told a young Latino client he should learn English before banking like a real citizen. The incident, dated March 2021, ended in a quiet apology letter signed by HR but never reached a client. Another leaked file from October 2019 detailed how Deborah forcibly downgraded an elderly black veteran's account, claiming he didn't qualify for investment-level service despite his documentation. The man later received a private settlement, sealed by a non-disclosure agreement. By Friday morning, a major financial blog published an exposé titled "Pattern of Prejudice," inside Argent Trust's quiet history of discrimination. It listed 6 formal complaints linked to Deborah's spanning over a decade, most involving clients of color. The piece featured redacted testimonies from former employees who had either been silenced or transferred after attempting to report her behavior. The article's top comment read, "They didn't just ignore racism, they protected it." The thread went viral instantly. At the same time, screenshots from the bank's internal messaging platform began circulating on Reddit and Twitter. They showed a group chat titled "Frontline Excellence," where Deborah and several other staff frequently shared unfiltered jokes, memes, and commentary on clients. One message showed a gif of someone throwing Monopoly money, captioned, "When they try to act wealthy but can't spell fiduciary." Another had Deborah's name next to a message that read, "Today's cosplay, fraudulent finance." Bro came in dressed like he owned a jet. The timestamp matched the exact morning Malcolm had entered the branch. She had sent the message only minutes after the confrontation, attaching a selfie of herself smirking at her desk, her caption, "Another one for the books." The backlash was immediate. Deborah's face became the symbol of unchecked arrogance, her words dissected by news panels and reaction videos. Activist influencers began using her image in their content to exemplify racial bias disguised as professionalism. Comedians on late-night television mocked the cosplay remark, one saying, "Apparently being black in a suit is now a costume. Should have worn the billionaire badge. Huh." Even neutral analysts began to speak out, stating that if this pattern of behavior had been tolerated for years, the problem wasn't just one teller, it was embedded in the company's culture. Argent Trust tried to respond again, this time through a 9 a.m. press release titled "Commitment to Accountability," but it was too late. The language was cold, corporate, and unconvincing. It acknowledged that prior complaints would be re-evaluated for compliance gaps, but offered no apology, no names, and no tangible action. That same day, a whistleblower identified only as M sent an open letter to several news outlets. M claimed to be a former compliance officer at Argent who had resigned after being pressured to drop 2 investigations, both involving Deborah. The letter detailed how HR had been instructed to avoid public legal action at all costs and use settlements with NDAs as a standard method of erasing incidents. "We were told not to escalate unless the client had media connections or legal threats. Otherwise, keep it in-house," the letter stated. Deborah was untouchable because she brought in high account volumes and had an executive sponsor. Everyone knew she was a risk, but she was their risk. The letter was printed in full on multiple major news platforms, sending Argent's leadership into a full-scale damage control operation. Internally, the executive team began investigating how many employees might come forward next. Legal began sorting through decades of sealed documents, calculating how much exposure the company might be facing. HR tried to scrub the chat platform, but the screenshots were already embedded in too many corners of the internet to vanish. By Sunday evening, Deborah's face appeared on the cover of a leading financial magazine beneath the headline, "Culture of Contempt: How One Bank Teller Became a Symbol of a System." Her name was now synonymous with elitism, casual racism, and corporate failure. Meanwhile, clients began to flee. A prominent tech investor publicly tweeted he had transferred his firm's funds elsewhere. "I don't trust a bank that punishes truth and rewards mockery," he wrote. That single tweet was retweeted over 200,000 times. Argent's weekly call volume tripled with cancellation requests and inquiries about ethics reviews. Deborah herself remained silent, her profile pictures removed from all platforms, her digital presence wiped by PR teams. But silence wasn't protection anymore. A trending tweet simply read, "If Deborah has 1,000,000 haters, I'm one of them. If she has 1 hater, it's me. If she has none, I'm gone." Humor cloaked rage, but the damage was real. Anonymous insiders began leaking more names, other tellers, managers, even directors who had played roles in suppressing similar incidents. Deborah Lunsford's image had become a meme, a cautionary tale of unchecked arrogance and systemic protection. Her messages, mocking tone, and legacy of discrimination had cracked Argent's glossy exterior wide open, exposing a rot that had been festering for years. But one question buzzed across every headline, every social media post, every speculative article. Who was Malcolm Ray? While the bank spiraled, Malcolm had vanished from the public eye. He had remained completely silent throughout the firestorm. No social media posts, no interviews, no statements. His silence, once viewed as quiet dignity, was now being interpreted as something more calculated. The public began speculating. He wasn't just a wrong client. He had presence, posture, poise. People began asking questions. Journalists, hungry for the next layer of the story, began digging. A finance blogger posted a grainy image of Malcolm entering a car with tinted windows. A Reddit thread emerged suggesting he was connected to a major investment group. Theories flew wildly, but none stuck, until Wednesday morning, when a leaked internal document from an investor relations platform listed Redmere Capital as one of Argent Trust's primary institutional clients. Buried in the footnotes of a quarterly summary, one name stood out: Malcolm J. Ray, founder and chief executive officer, Redmere Capital Holdings. The story exploded. Redmere Capital was not a household name, but within high finance, it was a quiet titan. Known for aggressive acquisitions and equity restructuring, Redmere had built a reputation for influencing major financial institutions without making headlines. It didn't advertise. It didn't sponsor events. It didn't play to the crowd. It played to power. And Malcolm Ray, the man who had been publicly dismissed as a fraud, was its founder and current CEO. Within hours of the revelation, news anchors across networks were scrambling to build narratives around him. The man behind the silence. One headline read, "From humiliation to high finance, the untold story of Malcolm Ray," said another. Financial analysts appeared on air to explain how Redmere quietly held minority stakes in over 20 financial firms, including 3 of Argent Trust's direct competitors. They spoke of Ray's precision, his strategic investments, and his influence in shaping mergers behind closed doors. Suddenly, Malcolm wasn't just a victim. He was a force. People began quoting his past speeches, digging up old conference footage from years ago where he spoke of fairness in financial ecosystems and the responsibility of those with power to correct structural wrongs. "There is no neutrality in systems built on exclusion," he had once said. That line was now trending, appearing on signs held by protesters and digital artwork flooding social media. While the world turned its attention to Malcolm's brilliance, Malcolm himself still said nothing. Redmere Capital's official website, previously barren by design, updated its homepage. A single line in stark serif font appeared against a black background. "Integrity isn't optional." No signature, no logo, just that sentence. It went viral within minutes. The statement was dissected endlessly. Some saw it as a warning. Others interpreted it as a declaration of values. Some financial insiders took it as an indication that Redmere was preparing to act. Market speculators watched closely. Investment firms started contacting Redmere's listed advisors for clarification, hoping to understand whether the company would divest or retaliate in any capacity. Argent Trust stock, already rattled by controversy, dipped further with the weight of this new revelation. At the same time, internal leadership at Argent was fractured. Some board members believed they should beg Malcolm for a private meeting and issue a full public apology. Others still clung to the illusion that the storm would pass. But the silence from Malcolm and the weight of his identity had altered the atmosphere. He no longer needed to speak to be heard. His story had eclipsed the banks. On Twitter, users began constructing timelines of how events unfolded. They noted the eerie symmetry, how Malcolm had remained calm throughout the humiliation, had walked away in silence, had watched as the bank mocked him, and then let the truth speak for itself. One user wrote, "He knew exactly who he was and who they were. That's what scared them." Another added, "He didn't need to yell. He had the leverage all along." The story transformed from a moment of racial injustice to a testament to restraint, intelligence, and silent power. As this narrative solidified, others began stepping forward. Minority executives across various industries wrote op-eds and posted personal stories of being underestimated in corporate spaces. "We've all been Malcolm," one black CFO wrote. "The only difference is he had the platform to flip the table." Corporate America took notice. Panels were formed. Institutions quietly reviewed their HR records and diversity audits. The financial world, for the first time in recent memory, looked inward. Back at Argent Trust, panic was setting in. Rumors swirled that several of their long-term institutional partners were requesting meetings. The director of investor relations resigned. 2 regional managers went on sudden leave. The moment Redmere Capital updated its homepage with the phrase, "Integrity isn't optional," Executives at Argent finally understood the storm they were in was not about perception anymore. It was about consequence. The following morning, before the building officially opened, CEO Patrick Norwell called an unscheduled closed-door meeting with his executive team. Attendance was mandatory. Directors, department heads, and senior legal counsel filed into the top-floor boardroom with grave expressions, most of them holding coffee cups that remained untouched. The glass walls were shuttered. Security was posted outside. No notes were taken. Norwell didn't waste time. He laid out the facts in his usual dry, methodical tone, though his pale complexion and tight jaw betrayed the panic coiling beneath his executive posture. In the past 48 hours, 7 major corporate clients had reached out to schedule immediate account reviews. 2 had already signaled the withdrawal of long-term capital accounts, totaling over $600 million. The bank's institutional hotline was flooded with queries about compliance practices, all of which hinted at potential severance. Norwell's voice cracked slightly as he relayed that Argent's strategic partners, especially those with exposure in ESG-sensitive industries, were on high alert. "They see us as a liability," he admitted. "This isn't about bad PR. It's about contagion." Silence followed, then murmurs. A legal officer asked if Redmere Capital had made any direct threats. Norwell said no, not directly, but then revealed something that caused the entire room to fall into a frozen hush. That morning, at precisely 3 a.m., an email had arrived in Norwell's private inbox from Malcolm Ray himself. The email contained no preamble, no threats, no pleas for justice. It contained a single sentence and a video file. The message read, "I've seen enough." The attached video was the original footage from the bank lobby, but this one was different. It was time-stamped, uncut, taken from internal security feeds with full audio, and it included pre-roll from 10 minutes before Malcolm entered the building to 5 minutes after he was escorted out. The camera angle captured Deborah watching Malcolm from the moment he entered. It recorded her laughing with another teller before he reached the counter. It caught every word, every pause, every gesture, and it destroyed every shred of credibility Argent Trust had tried to preserve. Malcolm hadn't shared it publicly. Not yet. But the implication was clear. He had more. He had the truth. And he had chosen not to use it. Not yet. Norwell didn't say what he intended to do about the message. He didn't need to. The video's silent presence in his inbox had the weight of a nuclear option. Across the table, executives whispered among themselves about how long they had before Redmere pulled its assets, or worse, coordinated a collective financial disengagement with other firms. The bank's vulnerability was no longer theoretical. It was immediate. Calls were already coming in from compliance heads at other institutions asking about their exposure to Argent. Norwell ended the meeting with a strained command to hold the line, but no one in the room believed it was possible anymore. In the hours that followed, the damage accelerated. For more clients, 2 hedge funds and 2 tech corporations submitted withdrawal notices, citing conflict of values and long-term trust erosion. Argent's trading desk began receiving signals that internal partners were reducing exposure in high-risk portfolios tied to the bank's umbrella. The investor relations team, which had operated on confidence and charm for years, now functioned like a trauma unit, taking call after call from nervous stakeholders. The bank's market position, while not yet critical, had begun to shift. Analysts noticed increased volatility. Shares, already on a downward slope, dipped another 6% before the bell. More worryingly, regulatory bodies had started poking around. A formal request for documents arrived from the Office of the Comptroller, asking for a breakdown of HR compliance over the past 5 years. The SEC sent a quiet inquiry into the bank's transparency on risk reporting. The board convened that night without Norwell to discuss interim leadership strategy. Word had started to spread internally that Norwell had received a personal message from Ray and failed to disclose its full contents. Some board members feared that Ray might not be done, that he had timed the email as a quiet move in a broader strategy, that every hour he remained silent was another hour of tension tightening around the institution's throat. Inside Norwell's private office, the CEO sat alone, staring at the email. He had watched the video twice, once on his laptop and once on his phone. It was flawless. It captured not just the humiliation, but the architecture of it. It was not only about what was said, it was about what wasn't. About the way Deborah ignored Malcolm's calm tone, the way security responded without question, the way the staff behind the counter smirked and said nothing. It wasn't just racism. It was systemic complicity. Norwell realized, with a sick twist in his gut, that the worst thing about the video wasn't that it had happened. It was how ordinary it looked. He considered responding, apologizing, begging, even though he wasn't sure what for. But he didn't. Instead, he watched the timestamp again and again, hoping for a detail that might shift the burden. There was none. Malcolm's email sat there, unyielding in its simplicity. A quiet judgment passed down by someone who no longer needed to speak loudly. That evening, the media began reporting that Argent's board was facing internal fracture. An anonymous source stated that several senior executives were exploring options for early retirement. They had watched his identity unfold, witnessed the chaos that followed, and speculated endlessly about his next move. Would he sue? Would he destroy Argent trust publicly? Would he retaliate in kind? And for days, he had said nothing, until now. At precisely 9 a.m. on Monday morning, the major financial networks abruptly interrupted their scheduled programming for a breaking news announcement. A podium stood on a stage within the heart of Manhattan's historic financial district, beneath the vaulted glass ceiling of a neutral venue normally reserved for high-level economic summits. Behind the podium were 5 chairs, for already occupied. The camera panned across them slowly. Familiar faces to anyone who had followed the news: the former chief legal officer of Argent Trust, the recently resigned director of institutional accounts, a compliance officer known for whistleblowing in 2021, and a former head of DI programs quietly dismissed during a departmental restructure the year prior. Each of them sat poised, collected, unblinking. Then Malcolm Ray walked onto the stage. He was dressed not in the high-luxury tailoring that had framed the viral footage, but in a more subdued, sharp navy suit. His face was calm. No anger, no bitterness, just clarity. He stood at the microphone for only a moment before speaking, his voice deliberate and unwavering. "Good morning. My name is Malcolm Ray. I am the CEO of Redmere Capital. And today, I am not here to talk about injustice. I am here to talk about power, responsibility, and change." The room fell into a stunned hush. Journalists fumbled for their pens, cameras zoomed in, and analysts watching from their screens leaned closer. "What happened to me was not unique," Malcolm continued. "It was not a one-off incident or a misjudgment. It was the symptom of a culture that rewards exclusion, that punishes dignity when it doesn't fit its narrow image, and that has, for too long, operated without accountability." He gestured to the 4 individuals seated behind him. These are not disgraced executives. These are professionals who tried to steer their institution toward ethical standards and were cast aside. Today, they join me in announcing a new venture, an initiative rooted not in retaliation, but in evolution. He paused as a massive screen lit up behind him, revealing a sleek new logo, 2 interlocking circles forming a bridge beneath the name, Stonebrook. Stonebrook is a merger of Redmere Capital and a collective of equity-based financial organizations dedicated to democratizing high finance, removing barriers to access, and building institutions that reflect the world we actually live in, not the one certain people pretend exists. A hum filled the room. Murmurs echoed among the press. Malcolm continued, "This merger is more than financial. It's structural. Stonebrook will begin with $4.7 billion in managed assets, a chartered board of transparency advocates, and a commitment to reinvest a minimum of 20% of annual profits into community growth initiatives. Not grants, not PR write-offs, equity." He let that sit in the air. The gravity of his words did more than inspire. It shifted something. We will also be opening onboarding to institutions, firms, and individuals who have quietly exited relationships with Argent Trust in the last 2 weeks. You'll find we operate on principle, not preference. In another building, just 2 blocks away, the executive board of Argent Trust was watching the press conference live from their emergency meeting room. The air was still. Norwell sat at the end of the table, his fingers steepled against his lips. Around him, the directors were pale, silent, processing what they were witnessing. The merger announcement alone was enough to trigger alarms. But the inclusion of former Argent staff, the people they had silenced, discredited, dismissed, cut deeper than any financial loss. It was a public reckoning staged as a future. And it was elegant, not angry, not desperate, just irreversible. Back on stage, Malcolm offered no gloating. He made no reference to the original incident, no condemnation by name. That restraint only amplified the impact. To the institutions watching, he said, "This is not a call-out. It's an invitation to do better, to be better. If you believe financial strength should not require moral compromise, there's a seat at our table." He stepped away from the podium and shook hands with the executives behind him. The room erupted in applause. The coverage cut to news anchors scrambling to interpret what had just happened. Analysts spoke of a tectonic shift in the finance world. Twitter exploded with hashtags like #StonebrookStarts and #FromRayToRise. Within the hour, Stonebrook's website went live with a waiting list already 10,000 names deep. Major clients of Argent Trust, already disillusioned, already halfway out the door, now had a destination. The fall of Argent was no longer speculation. It was happening in real time. And in boardrooms across the country, other institutions took note. This wasn't just a power move. It was a blueprint. The press framed it as the most graceful coup in financial history. Late-night shows turned Malcolm into a legend, not just for what he had endured, but for how he responded, with control, with vision, and without the need for spectacle. But what followed wasn't just a ripple. It was an orchestrated economic detonation planned down to the hour, a blow that had been measured and delayed for maximum impact. At 4:07 a.m. Eastern Time, before the market stirred, Redmere Capital submitted formal notices of withdrawal totaling $3.1 billion across multiple accounts tied to Argent Trust and its shell partners. These accounts were not simple savings or minor holdings. They were foundational positions, strategic long-term allocations across a complex web of subsidiary institutions, legacy funds, and quietly held equity pools that, once pulled, would send visible tremors through the financial markets. The withdrawal orders were segmented across 11 financial entities, each processed via automated clearance to execute before the trading day officially began. No press release accompanied the movement. No tweet, no interview circuit. Only the movement of money. That silence, once again, made the action all the more severe. Within minutes, market watch platforms caught the shift. Investment analysts who monitored high-volume transaction feeds flagged the anomaly. Redmere Capital Liquidate's entire Argent position became the top news item on market radar software. By 6:12 a.m., Bloomberg's pre-market bulletin issued an alert. Redmere divests Argent. $3.1 exit marks major blow to bank stability. The reaction was swift and devastating. Trading desks opened with chaos. Argent Trust's pre-market shares plunged over 15% before the first bell. Brokers scrambled to rebalance portfolios exposed to Argent-backed funds. Hedge funds paused trades and called emergency meetings. Institutional clients hit the lines demanding explanations. The banking sector braced itself, not because it didn't expect retaliation, but because the precision with which Redmere executed the divestment showed that Malcolm Ray had never once acted emotionally. Every move had been calculated. At 9:30 a.m., when the markets officially opened, Argent Trust shares nosedived another 14%. Within 2 hours, they had fallen a full 29%. News networks cut away from scheduled coverage to report on what was being dubbed the Ray Reckoning. Images of Argent's headquarters flooded every major feed. Reporters stood outside the building interviewing employees who were leaving in clusters, some holding cardboard boxes, others stone-faced behind security. The footage replayed like a slow-moving corporate collapse. On Twitter, Hashtag Argent Fall trended alongside hashtag Stonebrook Surge. Clients didn't wait for damage control. By mid-morning, hundreds of private account holders, business clients, and asset managers submitted termination notices or began processing transfers. Argent's online platform slowed under the weight of traffic. Call centers were overwhelmed. An anonymous source leaked internal memos instructing staff not to use the word crisis in emails or calls. But the damage wasn't just digital. Regulatory agencies pounced. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency issued a formal request for all internal communications related to HR policies and client handling protocols going back 5 years. The Securities and Exchange Commission followed with its own demand, a review of any withheld risk disclosures concerning public perception, diversity governance, and whistleblower protections. Investigative journalists were seen camping outside homes of former board members, chasing leads on past complaints. Former employees began receiving requests to testify. The image of Deborah Lunsford had disappeared from the bank's internal systems, her name scrubbed, her records inaccessible. But the internet never forgets. Her likeness continued to appear in every editorial that discussed the downfall, used as a symbol of arrogance blind to accountability. Meanwhile, Stonebrook published a formal announcement titled, "The Future Has Started." The document detailed their values, plans, and most notably, a welcome policy for previously underserved entrepreneurs and community banks. It emphasized 3 principles: integrity, accessibility, and reinvestment. Most importantly, it did not mention Argent Trust once. That omission, in contrast to the chaos Argent was suffering, further widened the gap between the two institutions. Stonebrook looked like the future. Argent looked like the past unraveling in real time. In the boardroom at Argent headquarters, panic turned into paralysis. CEO Patrick Norwell sat slouched in his chair, tie loosened, the glow from the crisis dashboard painting his face a sickly blue. He watched as the numbers collapsed on screen. Stock down 29%, confidence index at record lows, clients vanishing by the hour. The CFO murmured about liquidity pressure and short-term exposure risks. The general counsel warned that they might face multiple class action lawsuits, especially from institutional clients claiming misrepresentation. The head of compliance announced that several whistleblower complaints had resurfaced under anonymous aliases, this time with legal backing. No one mentioned Malcolm's name directly, but his presence was everywhere. The footage of him being shoved out of a lobby, the email he had sent, the press conference he had led, the billions he had withdrawn. He didn't yell, he didn't threaten, he simply acted. And each action dismantled Argent's illusion of invulnerability brick by brick. By noon, the press had named it Black Monday, the day the bank broke. It wasn't just about money. It was about a system that had built itself on arrogance and assumed it could get away with anything. Malcolm's strategic withdrawal, perfectly timed and flawlessly executed, didn't just hurt the bank. It exposed its weakness, its fragility, and most of all, its reliance on unearned trust. He didn't destroy Argent Trust. He allowed it to collapse under the weight of its own hypocrisy. Clients fled not just because of the money, but because they no longer believed in the institution's moral right to hold theirs. Stonebrook, by contrast, offered them something new, not just access, but a conscience. And in the financial world, conscience paired with capital is a force no institution can ignore. The final hour before market close saw Argent's board scramble to issue a halt request to trading regulators. Behind closed doors at a private estate rented out under a shell firm to avoid media detection. But leaks were inevitable. It was soon confirmed that CEO Patrick Norwell had been pushed into a corner. He sat, shoulders sagging, as the board chairman, under mounting pressure from both shareholders and federal contacts, delivered the ultimatum: resign or be removed publicly by vote, which would trigger a clause that voided his executive protection. Norwell didn't argue. He simply nodded. His resignation was formally filed at 7:52 a.m., worded in bland corporate legalese, effective immediately for the good of institutional recovery. By 9 a.m., every major network had picked up the story. Anchors reported his exit with restrained satisfaction. Stock tickers showed a continued decline. But the resignation was only the beginning. That same hour, the United States Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs announced a formal hearing. The topic: systemic bias, compliance failures, and executive protection within high-capital financial institutions. Argent Trust was listed first on the docket. Subpoenas were dispatched to multiple current and former employees. Among them was Deborah Lunsford. Her name had already become infamous, her likeness immortalized across media as the face of elitism and quiet racism. But now, her infamy was not only cultural, it was judicial. The subpoena required her presence before the committee and the Department of Financial Oversight. Her testimony would be under oath. As this news broke, another leak surfaced, this one far more damaging than any meme or online thread. Internal documents, obtained and published by an investigative journalist known only by their handle, at Finance Shadow, revealed a series of internal communications between Norwell and senior HR officials dated as far back as 2018. These emails, preserved by whistleblowers and confirmed through metadata, document a pattern. Deborah Lunsford had repeatedly been cited for conduct violations, several of them racially charged, and each time, the recommendation from HR was disciplinary action or termination. Yet every report was overruled by executive command. One email from 2019 read, "Her retention, while high risk, remains strategically valuable. See Q4 acquisition referrals." Another from 2020, penned directly by Norwell, read, "Do not escalate. Client retention from her desk exceeds 3.5 M this quarter. Manage optics, not action." Another note, hastily written and timestamped during an HR review in 2021, read, "Deborah's language today was inexcusable. She mocked a client's dialect. When I brought it to Norwell, he waved it off and said, 'As long as the whales don't complain, we're fine.'" That line, "as long as the whales don't complain," became an instant flashpoint. It trended online, appeared in op-eds, and made it into late-night monologues. Protesters added it to placards. One banner at a protest outside Argent's flagship branch read, "We're not whales, we're people." Deborah, already hiding from the public eye, was now a liability too toxic to protect. Her subpoena ensured she would not vanish quietly. News outlets reported that her lawyer, a corporate defense attorney with connections to Argent's prior cases, was in contact with federal officials. But the general consensus was clear: she would testify, and her testimony might expose everything. Inside Argent, panic turned to desperation. The interim CEO, hastily appointed from the Risk Management Division, attempted to issue a unifying statement. It fell flat. No one wanted unity. They wanted answers. Investors demanded a forensic audit. Staff morale plunged. A senior VP resigned live during a financial broadcast, tossing his badge onto the news desk and stating, "I stayed too long. I watched too much. Never again." More internal documents continued to surface. Meeting notes, audio transcripts, redacted memos. A picture formed not just of one toxic employee, but of an institution designed to silence dissent and elevate profit over people. Whistleblowers were not punished with firings. They were vanished through transfers, technical suspensions, or performance reviews that quietly ended careers. Deborah had not acted alone. She had been the visible tip of a hidden blade. Norwell, it turned out, had protected her not out of personal loyalty, but strategic exploitation. She managed accounts with high-net-worth clients who appreciated her direct style, according to one internal survey. These clients were by and large white, male, and held outsized influence in investment corridors. Some had written direct endorsements to Norwell praising Deborah for her candor, her no-nonsense approach, her unapologetic professionalism. These phrases now read like dog whistles. Senate investigators requested those letters. Some clients tried to backpedal, issuing denials or claiming misrepresentation, but their signatures were attached. The press had a field day. "Candor over conscience?" one headline read. "Argent's rotten core finally exposed." Financial analysts, once cautiously neutral, now described the institution as a case study in moral collapse. Ethics panels across major business schools assigned the scandal as urgent reading. Law students debated the implications of executive shielding and whistleblower protections. Meanwhile, Stonebrook's rise continued without commentary. Their onboarding platform, streamlined and transparent, gained another 8,000 new applications in a single day. Malcolm Ray remained quiet, his face absent from the headlines. But his influence permeated every decision, every consequence. 3 weeks after the financial quake that had reshaped the landscape of American banking, the final echoes of Argent Trust's collapse arrived not with a bang, but with a testimony. It was a clear, cool morning in Washington, D.C., the kind that carried a deceptive stillness. Reporters lined the steps of the Capitol, cameras rolling, voices low, waiting for a woman whose face the nation had come to know not through achievements, but infamy. Deborah Lunsford exited the black sedan in a conservative gray suit. Her expression was not defiant nor polished, it was hollow, as if the weeks of public condemnation and legal pressure had drained whatever fire once sustained her smug superiority. Her lawyer walked beside her, but said nothing. She passed the crowd without looking up, only lifting her chin once inside the hearing chamber. It was standing room only. Senators lined the bench with clipped professionalism. Media filled the upper rows. Former clients, activists, and industry observers leaned in. Cameras streamed the session live to millions. Deborah sat at the lone witness table, placed her hands flat, and took the oath. What followed was not the hostile interrogation the public had anticipated. The senators, though firm, allowed her to speak uninterrupted after initial questions about her role at Argent Trust. Her voice, when it came, was brittle. "I believed I was doing my job," she began, "but I understand now that what I thought was professionalism was prejudice. What I thought was protecting the bank was protecting a version of power that had no room for accountability." The room held its breath. She paused, looking down, clearly shaken. "There were times I mocked clients I assumed didn't belong. Times I used language I never should have used. And when people tried to stop me, the system told them to sit down. HR would write it up, but Norwell would cover it up. He said it wasn't about feelings, it was about results. And I got results. At least, that's what I told myself." She recounted the emails, the meetings, the silence of her colleagues. "You don't have to be told to discriminate," she said quietly. "You just have to be rewarded when you do." Her admission didn't excuse her behavior, but it reframed it in a wider lens, a structure designed to groom cruelty, to shape bias into policy, and to reward loyalty to exclusion. "I take full responsibility for my actions," she said, voice cracking. "But I hope this hearing leads to questions not just about me, but about who made people like me possible." There were no cheers, no applause, just silence. The senators nodded, scribbled notes, and moved on. But the clip streamed and clipped across the web, became one of the most watched congressional testimonies in recent memory. Analysts debated whether Deborah's regret was genuine or strategic. Pundits dissected every inflection. But in a strange way, her words struck a chord, not because they exonerated her, but because they exposed something far more damning: the ease with which institutions normalize inhumanity when it's profitable. In the days that followed, Congress introduced new legislation aimed at enhancing whistleblower protections in the financial sector and requiring public reporting of internal discrimination complaints above a certain threshold. The Stonebrook Amendment, as it came to be called, was co-sponsored by a bipartisan coalition, all citing the Argent scandal as a watershed moment. Meanwhile, life outside of politics moved forward. Argent Trust filed for reorganization under Chapter 11, its assets being quietly acquired by various firms. The brand, tarnished beyond recovery, would not survive. But from its ashes, a conversation had ignited across every boardroom and bank branch in the country. Stonebrook Capital, under Malcolm Ray's direction, expanded rapidly, but with deliberate restraint. It remained lean, refusing to bloat its infrastructure with hollow growth. It held forums, educational summits, and hosted client councils that included community representatives and young entrepreneurs. It wasn't just building wealth, it was redistributing access. The pinnacle of this quiet revolution came during the first Stonebrook Youth Finance Summit, held in Chicago on the campus of a repurposed bank headquarters. Hundreds of high school and college students, many from underserved communities, sat in rows of folding chairs, notebooks in hand, eyes bright. They had come not just to learn, but to belong. And when Malcolm Ray finally took the stage, the room fell into silence. He stood there in a dark blazer, his presence calm but magnetic. He didn't speak of his rise or the scandal or the bank he had helped dismantle. He spoke of possibility. "You will be underestimated," he said. "You will be measured by appearances, by assumptions, by systems designed to reward those who already have. But your job is not to retaliate, it's to correct." He let the pause linger. "Justice isn't vengeance," he said, scanning the crowd. "It's correction. It's the moment you refuse to be what they expect and instead build what they never imagined." The crowd erupted in applause, but Malcolm didn't linger in the spotlight. He stepped back and allowed others to take a stage. Young founders, student analysts, newly certified advisors, each sharing how they were using financial tools to reshape their communities. In the back row, unseen by most, sat a woman in plain clothes, her hair pulled back, no cameras on her. It was Deborah. No entourage, no name badge, just a silent attendee, watching as the man she had once mocked built something bigger than retribution. She had enrolled quietly in community justice courses, volunteered at small literacy programs, and now sat there not as a symbol of disgrace, but as a reminder that transformation, though rare, is possible. She didn't seek forgiveness. She didn't deserve applause. But she was there, and for once, she was listening. The summit closed with a scholarship announcement. 5 students were awarded full funding for financial degrees under the Stonebrook initiative. The final words projected on the auditorium screen read, "The future includes everyone." Outside, the sky turned gold with evening light. The streets buzzed with life, with change, with the pulse of a world nudging towards something better. Not perfect, but better. And somewhere in that city, as doors closed behind the last attendees and laptops were packed into bags, a single phrase echoed quietly through the minds of all who had been part of this story, whether as villain, witness, or architect. Correction is the loudest kind of justice. The end. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more gripping narratives like it, make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps support the work and brings you into the world of suspense and meaningful storytelling. I'd love to hear what you think. What part of the plot hit you the hardest? Was there a twist you didn't see coming? And how do you feel about how the story ended? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let me know where you're watching from and what you'd like to see next. This journey is just beginning.